I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Brian O'Hara is a senior security consultant with Rook Security. He has over 20 years of experience in information security, audit, risk management, and executive advisory services. He's a published author and serves on both a CISO and a VISO for several Fortune 500 companies with global footprints that include specialties in HIPAA, PCI, manufacturing, and FDIC-related verticals. Brian currently serves as the president of the Indiana InfraGard chapter, president of the Indiana ISACA chapter, and was instrumental in developing Indiana's first two-year academic center of excellence in information security. With that, I'd like to welcome Brian.
Thanks, Matt. Morning, everybody. I haven't looked at the participant list on purpose so that I don't start trying to outthink who I should be doing the presentation for. Having said that, the presentation is really designed to talk about some fundamentals of how to get an information security program running if you don't have one. And if you do have one, how to do some evaluation from a high level of whether you're doing some of the right things, whether there's some pieces missing in your program that we think you might add to that, and then also where some of that stuff should take you in terms of helping you align your security initiatives with business strategies, and also at the end of the day, reducing risk for the organization and why you should do that. So, having said that, let's get started. Let me click on my pre-show here real quick. There we go. So just to talk a little bit about Rook, I won't make this a big salesy thing, but we are a provider of global IT security solutions. We help organizations develop cybersecurity programs, and our advisory managed security services deliver visibility, intelligence, and response to IT teams. We act as an integrated extension of internal teams and work with organizations, as you heard Matt say, from startups to Fortune 500 firms. That's fast-reaching Fortune 50 firms. We are currently, one of the awards we recently received is that we are ranked number 536 in the Inc. 5000. I forget the specific category, but Matt could tell you that, something about startups and managed service security services. And we also won the Information Security's Global Excellence Awards in Best Managed Security Services. So that tells you a little bit about some of the stuff that we're doing here at Rook. Here's some certifications. The reason I put this up on the board, you'll hear me talk about this later in terms of what good security looks like, is that with maybe one exception, every one of the certifications that you see up here is held by one or more of the staff at Rook. These are all very high-level certifications that require a minimum of 5 years experience before you're even allowed to set for the exams to get these certifications. So you can see the high level of training background and experience that our senior consultants bring to the table. This is just a quick list and overview of some of our major customers: Palo Alto Networks, Maru Networks, Mozilla, Porter Novelli. These are large companies around the country that have entrusted their security services to Rook. And kind of give you an example of the level of quality that Rook's bringing to the table in terms of helping our clients implement better security practices and services. And this is a list. This is the last salesy slide. This is a sort of a brief overview of the advisory and management services that we provide. There are other things that we do as well, but primarily I want to talk about our what we call virtual ISO services. So at some point in the presentation, I'll talk about, well, what if you don't have an ISO? We'll talk what an ISO is at first, but we'll talk about what do you do if you don't have one? Well, companies like Rook provide those kinds of services to companies like yours. We provide security posture assessments, penetration testing, vulnerability assessments. Anything you can see on here that has to do with security, we can provide from a service level. So let's get started. Does this ring true with anybody in your organization? This is a classic example of what bad security looks like. Putting your head in the sand and pretending that the problem will go away, because it won't. Here are some of the problems that I've laid out in terms of the things that you all are facing, whether you're in a financial vertical or healthcare, or if you're in agriculture, believe it or not. The Chinese are busting our heads hard trying to steal our secrets to seed development, things like that that you would never think about on a normal basis unless you're in that particular industry. So the biggest problem is just ignorance, just flat out being unaware of what the problems are and how to begin to address them. Another big one is the speed of change. I think we all understand how fast technology changes today. It's almost become every year we adapt to a new level of change or a new acceleration level of change. 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we didn't have smartphones. They didn't even exist. Today, most people can't live without one. We're controlling things in our home. We're doing things in our cars with them that we never even dreamed possible 8 years ago, let alone to be able to implement them that quickly. And really the biggest one is that we overlook sometimes is our increasing connectivity. I would imagine that of all the people on the call that you all have what we call BYOD, bring your own device. You have iPads, you have iPhones, you have Android phones, all those devices, tablets, all that stuff. Those connect to your networks all the time for email. They're surfing the web. You may have VPN clients attached to them so that they come in. You're moving documents in and out. You have cloud storage. This is bringing huge problems to the enterprise that need to be addressed. And then next is the IoT, stands for the Internet of Things, for those of you who aren't aware of that. Internet of Things are all those cool little gadgets that you see at Best Buy when you go to the store now. You can buy, I bought a scale for my bathroom. It talks to my watch across my wireless network. That seems pretty innocuous, right? Until somebody hacks into it, and who knows what kind of data they can get to. My wife and I were talking just yesterday about some of the new appliances that you can buy. There's a video thing you can put on your front door now, so that when you're not at home and somebody rings the doorbell, the video turns on. You can see who's standing at your front door. All kinds of interesting things like that. Cars have them now. You've read recently in the news about, I believe it was Chrysler, American Motors, the Jeeps that were hacked. And now they're having to do millions and millions and millions of dollars of recalls to get all that stuff fixed. That's the Internet of Things that we're talking about. Refrigerators, washers and dryers, furnaces, all those kinds of things that report diagnostic statistics back to somebody out there on the Internet. Those all provide a vast connectivity network that most people have never even really thought much about. Now, I'll jump to a side note for a second to talk about what we call SCADA networks that, unless you're in the business, doesn't really apply to you, but you should know about. And that is, when we talk about the Internet of Things, all those little wireless devices that allow their meter readers to read your gas meter, your water meter, your light meter, all that stuff, those are all connected to the gas pipelines, to the power grid, to all kinds of other networks. And those all provide endpoint intrusion points for malware, for hackers, for all kinds of ugly stuff to happen. The other problems we're facing today, I'm sure you've all read in the news about China, North Korea, Russia, Eastern Europe, nation-state attacks against our critical infrastructure. Those critical infrastructures are power, water, all the things that you use to run your business. So we'll talk later in the presentation about business continuity planning. Have you considered those things in terms of what impact would it have on your business if the water supply went off for 2 days, if power went out for 3 days, because some homegrown terrorist took a 30-06 to a substation out behind your building. Then we have C2C, or crime to crime. That's the back-end part of the criminal hacker network that isn't doing things for necessarily political reasons or what we call hacktivism, but they're just doing it for money, plain and simple. You read about it every day in the paper. Hacktivists, groups like Anonymous, like LulzSec, some of the names you've heard about in the news. You have to deal with that. If you have any kind of high-profile brand, you may very well get attacked by these guys on a regular basis just because they don't like you. No other reason. but they can really wreak havoc on your brand, on your ability to conduct business, et cetera. And then the last piece is, the thing that we like the most about social media with LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter is, we can post pictures of the kids, we can say things on Twitter, we can, keep our professional resume up on LinkedIn. But what we also have to understand is that the downside of that is the bad guys read all that stuff too, and they use it to track your activities. I work with executives oftentimes and IT people in particular to be careful about what they say in social media, to not give away critical information to somebody. It may seem innocuous to you. You may put something out on Twitter about how you hate these new 2012 Windows servers. Well, as a hacker now, I know you're running 2012 servers. That's information I probably shouldn't have in my hands. So those are some of the problems that companies face today in terms of, why do we need to do security? What's the purpose of it? And now we're going to talk a little bit about how to get started with that. So the next point I want to talk about is how many customers I run into who don't think they have anything of value. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to people who do payment card processing, that fall under PCI guidance, banks who fall under FFIEC guidance and FDIC rules. They understand that they have value and property and stuff like that. But let's say, let's take for an example, only because I know a little bit about it, just a little bit about it, steel manufacturing. Come on. There's not a lot of intellectual property or patents in steel manufacturing. You take ore, you melt it, you shove it through a thing that makes it come out in an eye bar or something else. That's all there is to it. What you're really working on is price and supply. Very, very small margins. So you wouldn't think that there's a lot of intellectual property there. There's no patents of any kind. So when I talk to those folks, they're like, well, we don't really have anything of any value. And then I say, okay, let's talk about the bank account. This is the most overlooked area of any risk assessment or any work I do in the field of audit or security that I ever see in a company. I go in and they're worried about their firewall, they're worried about internal hackers, et cetera, and no one has ever taken a look at, or very rarely took a hard look at, who's doing your online banking, who's managing your cash and your payroll, who's taking care of ACH and wire transfers. Do you even know what those are and how they work? Have you talked to your bank about the kind of security that they provide for you as a customer for that, and what can they do to help you secure your stuff? One customer I have up here in Fort Wayne transfers up to $30 to $50 million a week. $30 to $50 million a week in wire transfers. That is a lot of money if that account were compromised. And they have a lot of controls in place. But they recently, one or two of them up here have recently been phished. The executives have been targeted with phishing attacks. And again, it goes back to the thing of social media where the hackers, the bad guys are watching their activity on LinkedIn and Facebook. They're traveling out of town this week. Let's see if we can do something. And so even if you think you have nothing of value, I guarantee you have a bank account. And it has hopefully, if you're successful, you have a boatload of money in there. And it needs to be taken care of. Okay? So everybody has something of value, whether it be intellectual property, patents, secret sauce, trade secrets, that kinds of stuff. Everybody has something of value. And if you can't think of anything else, go look at your bank account. Okay? So now what happens when you get attacked? How do you prevent all that stuff from happening? It's a never-ending battle, right? Here's some interesting data on reported data breaches. You can see here that the rapid shift starting in 2011. This chart only goes to 13. It doesn't even include 14 and 15. And the chart just keeps right on going. The line just keeps right on going off the chart. So you can see that the number of breaches is increasing. Here's one of the reasons. Here's one of my theories. These bad guys have been in business now for 10 to 15 to 20 years, and they're getting really good at what they do for a living, just like you would after 20 years in a business. I couldn't get this one to come out very clear, but this breaks down the kind of attacks happening over time up through 2013 in terms of the types of attacks. You can see hacking, malware, social engineering, physical misuse and errors. And you can see by far hacking and malware are the two largest, but social engineering is the third one. And social engineering includes those things we talked about earlier, like watching your LinkedIn profile or your Facebook profile or your company's Facebook profile or Twitter. Watching all that information, I can begin to build a profile of activity of what's going on inside your company. So you may think that a particular post on one of those sites isn't of any real value, and it may not be. It's the aggregate you have to watch out for. You have to be very careful. You need somebody, normally inside the company, a security officer would do that on occasion. They go out and look at those profiles and look at the information you're sharing and go, wait a minute, guys, you shouldn't be doing this, to help you stay on top of that, because you may not see all that stuff. So here's one more chart I pulled off of Ponemon Institute. If you aren't familiar with the Ponemon Institute, they've kind of become, them and Verizon have become the de facto standards for providing accurate data and information about this. But you can see now that, you know, lost business costs alone we're talking in the billions of dollars here. Data breach notification and post-data breach costs are high, but the lost business cost is the highest factor. These numbers include both regulated and non-regulated industries. This is across verticals in the country. But the point is, you can see that the impact is huge. So let me stop there for a second and see if there are any questions before we start talking about how to actually implement or make changes in your information security program. If you have questions, pipe them over to Matt real quick on your chat box, and I'll wait for 30 or 40 seconds and see whether we get any responses. Otherwise, I'll go on. Okay, so just take a minute, send any questions you might have.
Brian, just so you know, right now there's no questions.
Are you getting? Okay. All right. So no questions. So we'll go on. Thanks, Matt. All right. So let's take a look first at, you know, a lot of security places want to talk about all the stuff that they have to sell. Well, let's talk a little bit for a minute about what does bad security look like? How do you know you got bad security? Maybe you have a decent program and you just don't know it. So let's talk a little bit about what bad security looks like, okay? This is a great example. This goes back to the social media stuff. Here's Batman saying to Robin, please stop checking in. A good friend of mine, this is a great example, a good friend of mine up here in Fort Wayne several years ago had a 17-year-old daughter. She's in college now, but 17-year-old daughter. He and his ex-wife are divorced. His daughter and ex-wife went to Florida for vacation, and they posted on Facebook how excited they were about going, et cetera, and then their pictures from Disney, et cetera. And they come back to their house, and they find that the daughter's car has been keyed, meaning scratched all the way down both sides. Well, broke up with a boyfriend a week before that they left for the vacation, and boyfriend saw that they were out of town on Facebook, came over and took his revenge. Cost my friend a pretty penny to get it fixed, because if you don't know already, keying a car takes it right down to the metal. It's really expensive to get it fixed. So, yeah, things like this. Stop checking in. Stop telling people everything about yourself. You don't need to do that. It may seem like fun initially, and you really have to watch your children, because they oftentimes will reveal things about you that you don't want revealed. So they're the weakest link. That's the first thing I do. If I'm a social engineer exec, I'm going to start watching their kids on Facebook. They will blab anything. So you got to keep an eye on that kind of stuff. Anyway, back to the slide. So what does bad security look like? Typically, when I go into a company and I do assessment, the first thing I notice is complete disconnect from senior management. Security is a bolt-on IT problem. Go fix it, Brian. What's it going to cost? I'll write you a check. Go fix it. That won't work. That's senior management disconnect. Second is poor oversight. I hear the security guys or the IT guys screaming bloody murder going, gosh, we need all this stuff fixed, but we can't get anybody involved, that no one will buy in to help us fix it because nobody's watching over them. Poor audit functions, including spelling. I just noticed the spelling error there. Sorry about that. Poor audit functions. What that means is for those of you who aren't familiar, if you haven't been in an audit situation in the past or have never been required to, the purpose of audit is to check to see whether or not what you say you're doing is actually being done or not. An example is you might have a policy that says anytime we make a change to this application, we will notify everybody 24 hours in advance. So as an auditor, I'm going to go, okay, great. Show me the last 6 changes you had and show me the corresponding notifications that you sent out. If you can't provide that, then evidently your policy is not working. That's a poor audit function. Nothing wrong with the audit itself, but it demonstrates that your policies and procedures are not being followed adequately. That's what I mean by poor audit functions. When they go in and they audit, they find all kinds of things not working. And then the last one I wanted to point out was the lack of any kind of reference framework. Now, I'm not a framework Nazi. There are a lot of people out there that are, but you should at least be aware that your team should be looking at and using some type of framework for reference. Otherwise, they're just shooting from their hip. You know, I call it the admin flavor of the day. I've run into this plenty of times where, you know, I go in and I see a shop where they've implemented virtualization and then they moved away from it and they moved back to it. And I ask the execs, how did that happen? Why in 3 years you've gone from, you know, A to B back to A again? Oh, well, it was our IT director. He, you know, the one we had before didn't like it, so he took it all out. Wait a minute. Why are they making those decisions? Why isn't senior management involved in this? Why is there no oversight about that? You should not be at the whim of your IT director. When they say, "Oh, we just want to change this because we don't like it," that doesn't fly. That's a sign of bad security. Okay. So easy to talk about that, poke holes in it, you know, point the finger, complain about people. Let's talk about what does good security look like. Because I see way more examples of bad security than I do good. So it's kind of like the policeman on the beat. You know, he's always seeing people at their worst. And about the only time he really gets to see them at their best is when he goes to church on Sunday. So let's talk a little bit about what does good security look like. I think that's just as important to understand. This slide came up because of a conversation I had with a colleague about how do you tell that the people you're talking to about good security know what they're talking about. There are a lot of security practitioners out there who are completely incompetent. Some of the things to look for are these kind of certifications you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. CISSP, SSCP, CISA, CRISC, and any SANS certifications. These are all extremely difficult. They require many years of experience before you can even sit for the exam, and the exams themselves are not easy. Their fail rate is extremely high. Last time I checked on the CISSP, the fail rate was still about 60% of people who take it the first time just fail it. It's a very difficult exam. It takes 4 hours to do it. The CISA and the CRISC, I've actually taken almost all these. The CRISC and the CISA were 4-hour exams, and believe me, I used every minute of my time taking those exams. They're very difficult exams to take. And then in addition to the exam passing, you have to have not only 5 years plus experience, but you have to have a fellow professional recommend you for the certification. So these are not easy to get. They're really not. When you see somebody who has one, it's not a guarantee that they're smart, know what they're talking about, are professional, but it's a good indicator that they put some work and effort into what they're doing. Okay. Good analytics. Security solutions should also be cost effective. You know, when you get a vendor who comes in and says, oh, we're going to, you know, they give you the silver bullet speech. What is it we say? Rainbows and unicorns. That's not how it works in real life. Security can be very cost effective. When I go and do assessments, I very, very often have recommendations that cost $0. And they can have dramatic impact on security operations. Those have to do with things like senior management engagement, proper oversight, audit functions, things like that. Those don't cost anything. You don't have to go buy something to fix it. You're not, the days of fixing security problems with boxes are over. That is not how it works. And then the last, and so people who come, the point to put that is people who come in trying to sell you a solution that will fix all your problems with a box or a set of boxes, don't buy that. Okay, that's not good security. And professional associations. All of the trusted professionals that I work with in the information security community belong to these associations. And the reason they do it is because they're all about promoting the professionalism of our work, as well as providing us with ongoing training. They all require ongoing CPE credit trainings to keep our certification. So just because I have my CISSP doesn't mean I get it forever. I have to continually take classes to stay abreast of new information in order to be able to do that. So these are professional associations, not membership associations, okay? So another thing about what does good security look like? Ongoing assurance testing. That's some of the audit stuff I talked about before. You can't just test it and pass and go, okay, good, we're done. Okay, we're secure. Doesn't work that way. You have to have some type of ongoing assurance testing, looking at all aspects of this, because the bad guys they are looking 24/7 at you, and the minute you slip, they're going to get you. So you have to have ongoing assurance testing in place. You should be reliant on processes and people, not technology. That will get you bit. It's your people and processes. JJ, our CEO, has a thing that he's been quoted on before, where when these three are in harmony, that's what you're looking for: people, processes, and technology. None of them by themselves will get you there. Senior management involvement is absolutely imperative. And when I say senior management, I mean from the CEO down. Everybody needs to be involved and have a stake in this, or it is, I don't want to say bound to fail, but it's certainly going to be a lot harder to make good strides in it. You've got to have senior management involvement. They're going to have to fund it. They're going to have to support it. And we all know that you lead by example. So if the top level management is involved, they get it, they're willing to buy into this, it's much easier to get employees to engage as well. It is not mandatory. You can still make a difference in your department or in your organization, but it goes a lot farther with senior management involvement. The next point is having a security voice at all levels of management. I preach really hard to my executives. Somebody needs to be in the room to talk about security when you're making major decisions, whether that be on the IT staff or the risk management staff or purchasing. We'll talk about vendor management a little bit. All of those areas, security has got to have a voice. You can't buy, for instance, applications because marketing likes it. Security needs a voice in that conversation to make sure that you're dealing with a trusted vendor, that your application isn't known and packed full of vulnerabilities, all kinds of things that you can't fix once you've bought it, okay? So security needs a voice at all levels, whether that be an ISO or somebody from the security team or how you do it. That voice needs to be heard, and they need to hear what you're doing. That's where the governance and oversight comes in terms of reporting to senior management. So what I like to see is whether it's a chief information security officer or just an information security officer, somebody needs to be able to go directly to senior management and say, I think this is a bad idea and here's why. That line of communication is imperative. Otherwise, I see this all the time. Applications get purchased, contracts get signed, and you try to patch the holes later, and it's way more difficult and will cost you 2 to 5 times as much money versus doing it up front. And so as a result of that, you also need good technical oversight, because obviously you need to have somebody involved who's having that conversation, who has the technical background to be able to have those kinds of conversation. And then the last bullet, vendor management, that is absolutely critical in terms of, and we'll talk some more about this in a few more minutes when I get to the vendor management slide, about making sure that you're doing business with the right people and you're doing business the way you want and need to be doing business, not the way they want to be doing business. Okay? I'm going to talk in a minute about the components of all this. Let me stop again, ask for questions real quick. Take 30 or 60 seconds. Matt, just keep me
Again, you can use the chat feature to chat your questions to myself, Matt Pitchford, the host. Right now, there's no questions, Brian. So if you just want to continue on.
Okay. All right. I know some of this is lecture, but I do want to open this up for questions, if nothing else, at the end. What I wanted you to have is a deck you can take away and go, these are the things Brian said we should be looking at and doing. And so I'm not sure there will be a lot of questions up until this point, but all right. So how do we get started with all this? How do you do this? Let's pretend that you don't have an information security program. And if you do have one, as I talk along, you know, make a note of the bullets in here that, oh, we don't have that piece. We don't have that piece. And this comes from years of not necessarily, you know, PhD level research, but just working in the field. And the first thing is you have to start at the top. You've got to have a conversation with the executives because it's their business, okay? Oftentimes I get this entitlement or this ownership stuff coming from the IT department. It's not their company. This company belongs to the execs. They're the ones who put the money together. They may or may not have shareholders, but this is their company, and they have every right to make the decisions that are being made. You don't have the right to override that. Your responsibility is to provide them with adequate information to make well-informed decisions, but you do not have the right to make those decisions for them. Okay? It's really that simple. Second, ask for help. That's what Rook is all about. If you don't know what to do, or you're confused, or you have a problem in one spot, or you're wanting to get a program started, pick up the phone and call us. It doesn't cost you anything to call and ask. I did a conversation with a guy the other day, a young man down in the south part of the city, a one-man shop. But what he does is very sensitive. He handles a lot of money for a lot of rich people, and he has a lot of private information he had to handle, and he wanted to know if he was doing it correctly or not. And we spent probably an hour on the phone with him just chatting about, well, here's some of the things that you ought to be doing at a minimum, and here's how we can help, et cetera. And it turns out he didn't purchase any service from us. But he did send us a nice thank you email saying that what we told him was helpful, et cetera, et cetera. So just pick up the phone and call. It doesn't cost anything. It costs absolutely nothing. I'll take your calls. Our sales guys will take your calls, as will any other company. But please ask for help. Don't be the typical guy, because I'm sure most of the people on the call are guys, just because of the nature of our industry, unfortunately. You know, don't be the guy who doesn't ask for directions. Ask for help. There's tons of it out there. Okay. Next one is this doesn't have to be NASA. Okay. I want to talk about focusing on the fundamentals. There's about 8 or 9 things I'm going to show you in a minute that I can guarantee you will reduce your risk probably 90%. 90% of what needs to be cleaned up can be done with 8 or 9 very, very simple, straightforward things to do. And then the last is you need to increase your knowledge about security. If you're on the call and you're not a security expert, keep learning and reading about it, take classes, et cetera. If you're an executive, go to your IT team, ask them for help. What do I need to learn about? What is it you want me to understand? Because one of the problems we have with executives is IT people don't talk C language, and C-levels don't know how to talk or understand IT language. And doing that translation can be very difficult sometimes. It takes work together to get that done. So start off with the basics. First thing is put somebody in charge of this in your company. I don't suggest to be the CEO because you got enough stuff to do on your plate. Make somebody, name them, give them the title, Information Security Officer. So everybody in the company goes, that's who you need to ask. They can point the finger in the org chart or something like that. Put somebody in charge and then make them accountable. Okay? Make them accountable. But to do that, you also have to dedicate resources to that person. In the world of banking, in FFIEC and FDIC regs, you're required to provide the ISO in your bank, because you're required to have one, with the resources needed to do their job. That means financial, FTE, et cetera. If you're shown to be negligent in that area, the bank will be penalized. You must give them the resources they need to do their job, because the bank auditor can't come in and the ISO just throw up his hands and go, look, I know what I'm supposed to do, but the bank won't give me the money to do any of it, so we're going to fail our audit. He's not going to get fired. Well, he might get fired, but he's not the one who's going to have the hard conversation. It's going to be the execs. The CEO is going to sit down with the auditors, and they're going to go, you either fix this or we're going to close you down. It's that simple. So dedicate resources. Begin with governance and oversight. And I'm going to write down, I'm going to give you some more stuff about that in a few minutes here, but begin with governance and oversight, meaning you have to have some kind of framework and structure inside the organization to help keep an eye on all this. It shouldn't be done by a single person. The ISO is your point person, but there should be more than one person involved so that you don't get that, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, the admin of the day flavor where, well, this IT director didn't like it, so he pulled it out. You can't do that. It's disruptive to business. It's not cost effective, but most C-levels just go along with it because they don't know the questions to ask. They don't understand. Next important point is to write it down. Create a written information security program. It doesn't have to be more than a page or two. Everybody gets freaked out because they think, oh my gosh, we got to write this big heavy document. No, you don't. Unless you're regulated. If you're in a non-regulated, if you're in a regulated industry, you probably already got one. If you're not, it doesn't have to be that complex. One of the companies I work with is Do It Best Corporation up here in Fort Wayne. Our information security program is about 4 pages long. Very simple, but it's been very effective because people can understand it. I've seen information security programs in banks before that were 130 pages, and it's just ridiculous trying to read it. But you need to have it written down. You need to name it, call it out. Here's our information security program. Call it that, your ISP. And then the last bullet is begin implementing risk-based decision-making. And I say this because I don't know how many execs are on the call, but one of the things I do when I talk in my exec presentations is executives know more about risk-taking than any IT person I've ever met will ever know. They put their pocketbook on the line every single day when they come to work. They understand risk-taking way better than I think we ever will. So listen to them and help them understand how you want to implement the same kind of decision-making inside your organization. And you'll find out very quickly what your organization's risk tolerance is. If your CEO is a financial risk taker, there's a very good chance he's not or she is not an IT risk taker, and they will want to lock things down very tightly. But they'll also want to do it cost effectively, and that's where risk-based decision-making comes in. At what point do you stop spending money? Where do you begin to have diminishing returns? Okay? So let's talk security fundamentals for a minute. I put the picture of this book up here because this is one of the, well, this is the book. This is the 2nd edition. I believe this is in the 5th edition now. This is the book I used when I taught, when I was the program chair for information technology at IB Tech Northeast up here in Fort Wayne. And it's a great book. If you are, Mark Chiampa is a phenomenal author. If you're ever curious about getting to know what security is about at an entry, this is an entry-level college book. So anyone with a freshman level of understanding and reading and comprehension can get through this book and understand it. It's a great resource for understanding what your IT and security team are struggling with. And if you're not a security person, but you work in IT and you want to learn more about it, great book to take. IB Tech still teaches the class, I believe. I think it's probably the most widely used textbook in the industry. Anyway, so here's some tips for you. This is some of the stuff, you know, Matt helps me understand. It's like, give them something they can do, Brian, they can take away from this. I'm like, all right, cool, I can do that. So the first one is access controls review. I will bet you that probably 30% of the people on this call have users in their network who have administrative access on their machines that they should not have. Get rid of it. This happens big time in the financial arena, in the banking machines I was talking about. People who are doing ACH and wire transfers, I walk in, they have admin access. That's a heyday for malware, because if malware gets on that machine and it has that account has administrative access, they have full reign and can do anything they want. Ensure endpoint protection. Make sure, so that's real easy. You just remove the access. It's that simple. Second, make sure that your endpoints are running proper, updated antivirus and anti-malware. It's that simple. Just make sure that they are. How to do that can get really complicated. But the point is, make sure that they're running the most recent of everything. OS and application patches, that's probably the #1 killer on networks today. Java, Flash, Internet Explorer out of date, etc. Get your OSs and your applications patched and up to date. If you can't, because of some reason, so for instance, you're working with an application that requires Internet Explorer 9, then reach out to the information security community to find out ways you can do things like sandboxing the application, again, removing admin access. There are other things you can do to correct those, but in the absence of having to use outdated software, get your stuff patched. Reduces your risk dramatically. Remove admin access, I already mentioned that. Change all your default configurations and passwords. I would hope that no one on this call has ever bought a wireless router at Best Buy, taken it home, plugged it in, and left it just the way it is. You would be amazed. That is probably the number, I think that's the #2 or 3 on the OWASP top 10 hit of problems that when they scan the internet and they find problems, it's because people buy things, put them on the internet, and don't change the default passwords or the configurations. So the bad guy, well, there's another spelling error. Sorry about that. A little dyslexic today. Yeah, leaving default passwords and configurations. So I already know that the inside of your network is 192.168.1.1, and I know that the default password is admin. Boom! I own you. I'm now inside your network. I can start sniffing around your machines. I can look at whether or not you have admin access. Who knows? Maybe you put an auto login on your Windows box so you don't even have to put in a password. Boom, I own you. I can take anything and everything you own in the network at that point. It's really easy to do. See what I mean? These are really simple, concrete steps that will reduce your risk dramatically. We spend probably 80% of our time when we go and do assessments fixing this stuff. Just these things right here. Secure your wireless. You know, ask your IT guys, are we using the latest in encryption and authentication on our wireless? Not just encryption, but encryption and authentication. Are we using WPA2? Are we using enterprise or personal? You know, you don't have to know all the technical differences about that, but are we using the best of what we can? And is our network, you know, segmented properly? Another great, #1 on the hit parade when I go and look at wireless is, yeah, they've set up all the WPA stuff correctly, but the network's not segmented. So the guest network is the same as the internal network. And bing, I'm on the guest network with no username and password. I can start sniffing stuff. The boss's kid brings their iPad in. They forget that dad's username and password is on it. They connect to the guest network unencrypted. Booyah, I own the pad. Now I got his passwords. Simple little things like this. Very, very easy to fix. And then the last one is secure your remote access. So when you have people coming in with VPNs, et cetera, make sure those are configured properly. Test them. Have them reviewed by third parties on an ongoing basis. Make sure that that stuff is secured properly. What happened to Target? An unsecured remote access connection. That's how they got hacked. The HVAC guys came in through a VPN, and the network wasn't segmented properly. And the piece of malware that got on an HVAC machine was able to propagate and get to terminals in stores to compromise card numbers. If they had done these things right here on this page, that very possibly could not have happened. This isn't rocket science. These are seriously very easy things to do. You'd be amazed at how often they're overlooked. Take this slide deck, go back to your network, and ask your IT people, are these done? Do we have these in place? And if they say yes, say, okay, show me. Prove it. Show me you have this done properly. These are extremely important, very fundamental things that you can do to reduce your risk dramatically. We're not talking about, you know, do I need to buy a Palo Alto or a Checkpoint firewall? What can I afford? We're not talking about, you know, do we use Windows 7 or do we use Windows 10? These same things apply regardless of the OS, regardless of the, I don't care if you're running a Mac. These same these same points apply to all of those situations, okay? Probably what I would say, if there's one important slide in this whole deck, that's it right there. Those are the things that need to be done. All right, So let's talk about, I'm running a little bit behind, so let me wrap through these real quick. What's an ISO? What is an information security officer? That's the point person who should be able to provide guidance and oversight for you. They can help develop the information security program. They can write policies. They should have the ability to be a good technology advisor, a practice advisor, and an industry specialty advisor. They ought to be able to talk to you about Office 365, about cloud security, et cetera, to be able to answer those questions. And how do they fit in the leadership, overall leadership model? You should have an ISO who has experience in multiple environments, financial, healthcare, PCI, et cetera, and able to speak what I call multiple languages. Because as an ISO, I need to talk to the execs, I need to talk to the guys doing development, I need to talk to the IT managers, and I need to be able to talk to managers. Those are really important connections that I need to be able to carry the message across the organization. So a good ISO typically can speak multiple languages. Some components of a good security program. We talked about governance, technical oversight, risk management, vendor management, incident response, or business continuity. I'm going to go into each of these a little more in detail here real quickly. So let's talk about governments. Committee development. You need to provide, I want you to spread the decision-making around several parties, key stakeholders. So people have skin in the game, but it shouldn't, those kinds of decisions should not be made by an individual. For the same reason you wouldn't make, if you're in a corporation that's publicly traded, you don't make decisions that way because your shareholders may react. You need to take everybody's ideas into consideration before decisions arrived on. And you need to engage in risk assessment activities constantly be reviewing. Is our risk being managed properly in this area, in vendor management, in IT purchasing, in in our committee development? Are we managing risk appropriately for the organization and based on the nature and complexity of the organization? Providing good technical oversight. I was just talking a minute ago about the ISO needs to be able to provide guidance in developing strategies around security, cloud, application, and how many of you know anything about IAM, Identity Access Management? If you're in a larger organization, you got 1,000 to 10,000 to 20,000 employees, managing identities becomes a monumental task and is becoming a very large part of the security community in the last few years. And then development of policies aligned with the business strategies. You want to have somebody who's engaged with top management, that's your ISO, who can develop policies to ensure that they are in alignment with the business strategy, because that's what security is about. What you're about is not protecting things for the sake of protecting them. You're protecting them so that the business can grow successfully. That's really what it's about. Risk management assessments, risk assessments, training and oversight, and developing an understanding of your organization's risk profile. Are you a risk taker? Is your organization interested in risk, or are they risk averse? A bank, pretty risk averse. A hospital, pretty risk averse. Manufacturing company might be real risk takers. They may, for instance, take, here's an example. So I'm a steel manufacturer. I may take $50 million and throw it, that's in my bank account, throw it in a sweep account that goes around the globe all night long, because that'll make me $180,000 in profit just for putting it in the sweep account overnight. I made $180,000. I didn't have to do anything. But I could lose money doing that. But 80% of the time you win, so yeah, I'll take that risk. Bank would never do that. A bank would never engage in that kind of risky activity. So developing an understanding of your organization's risk profile is really important in terms of how you go about making those decisions. And then vendor management, assurances of outside vendors. Here's a great one: financial stability. You know, have you looked at your vendors, especially your critical vendors? Have you looked at their financial statements lately? Are they going to be in business in 5 years, especially if you're investing a lot of money in them? Do they have an incident response plan? What happens if they get hacked? And then if they are, how are problems resolved? How do they do that? And have they done a good job in the past? And what are your SLAs, service level agreements? Have you read and reviewed those recently? Do you do so on an ongoing basis as part of your overall vendor management program to ensure that your company's getting what they're paying for? Okay. Incident response and forensics. We all know that anymore it's when, not if you get hacked. So let's just drop the facade that we're going to stop it and talk about how are we going to respond. Can we respond quickly? Does your company even have an incident response and forensics policy? Do they have anyone on retainer to jump in the event that something goes haywire? Do you know who you call first? How do you decide that an incident has occurred? Do you have regulatory rules that tell you exactly what that threshold is, et cetera? And then what are your legal, reputational, and operational impacts of any kind of an incident? If you're a regulated industry, have you contacted your attorney so that they can act on your behalf, et cetera? What are going to be the reputational, operational impacts? Most of the time, if you're not a customer-facing company, it's more about operational than it is reputational. But if you're a customer-facing company, if you're Best Buy and your credit card company the company you outsource it to gets hacked, you can bet that you're going to take a reputational hit as well as an operational hit. And then business continuity in the face of a disaster. Do you have a plan? Have you practiced it? Is it written down? Has it been reviewed this year? Do you have anything in place like that? When I talk about a disaster, in Indiana, the first thing that comes to mind for me always is a tornado. Tornado or a big bad lightning storm or a windstorm like we had 3 years ago that had that weird, funny name. I forget what it was called, where it ripped trees out of the ground and all kinds of wild stuff. Well, what if you're in a sheet metal building and a bad storm like that rips the roof off your data center and your machines all get wet and they blow up? Do you have a plan for how to deal with that kind of stuff? Have you had people go around and look at your physical security from an external point of view to talk about, did you know this could happen? One of the stories I've always liked to talk about is at Roche Diagnostics down in Indianapolis a number of years ago. They had like 3,000 employees on the campus down there. One day the fire department comes in and says, everybody out of the building now. We have a sewer gas leak, which is methane, which can explode at the slightest spark. They had to completely empty the building. You didn't have time to get your purse or your tablet or laptop. Out of the building now. Every 3,000 people, gone. Closed for 2 days. Are you prepared for that? Have you ever even thought that might happen? Do it best up here. We talk all the time about there's a railroad track right next to the company because they ship lumber, large orders of lumber and plumbing supplies and building supplies on it, so it's convenient for them to be right next to the rail yard. What happens if there's a derailment? What happens if that's a tank full of lethal gas of some kind, or ammonia for fertilizer or something like that? Got to think those things through. So, in summary, I think we're about at the end here, Matt. As we like to say around Rook, security's dirty. It's hard. It's complicated. It can be difficult, but please, please, please hear this message. It can be managed. When you feel like you're out of your element, pick up the phone and call us or somebody for help, because there's plenty out there. And with that, I'd like to close it out and thank you all for coming and ask if there are any questions. We've got at least 5 or 10 minutes here. We can go with questions. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. We have a question. We have a question. Can you explain why there should be a clear delineation between the ISO and the CIO, or maybe why the CIO and ISO might not be the same person?
I think that's a question that can be answered only by the individual organization. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I know plenty of ISOs who report directly to the CIO, and it works great for their organization. I know other ISOs who bang heads with the CIO constantly. I think there's a potential there for a lot of conflict because of a CIO is typically faced with decisions about budgeting, about technology issues, et cetera, and security is not on his or her front burner, and that is the ISO's primary responsibility. The trick becomes in partnering with the CIO. That's really what it's all about. And my thoughts are it doesn't matter who reports to whom. It's really about partnering with those folks so that senior management has adequate information to make good risk-based decisions and that security has a voice at the table. I don't think it's appropriate when the CIO discounts the ISO and says, you're not important, I don't care. They have to find a way to work together. that's my 2 cents on that. Anything else? Hope that helps. Matt, did I lose you? Oh my gosh, nope, I'm still here. I thought I lost everybody. Are you still there, Matt?
I'm still here. Sorry, I was on mute. It looks like that was the only question we have so far. If there are any other questions,
a couple minutes if you want.
Yeah, we can give it a couple more minutes. Just chat those right in the chat window.
And this is one of those instances where, you know, reach out for help, ask me. I'm here on the phone, and you got my attention, and I'll answer any questions you got. Be happy to. I love talking about this stuff. You have a hard time shutting me up.
One of the questions I always get asked at trade shows, Brian, is, you know, what are like the main first steps to get started with looking at a security program? What are the top 2 or 3 things that they should be looking at?
Well, so the first thing is, if you've never put one together, you really should ask somebody for help, because trying to do it from scratch is kind of silly when there's plenty of folks around to help with. So first thing I would say is ask for some help, get some ideas of how other people have done that. And then secondly is sit down and have a conversation with senior management. If you are senior management, you know, take this presentation and kind of review some of this. But get your IT people together. If you have risk management people in the organization, pull them in on the conversation, and begin to just have a sit down at the table where everybody has an equal voice to be heard about this. Because, you know, my very first slide was sticking your head in the sand like an ostrich. That's not going to work. That's going to get you into trouble. So those would be my first 2 steps.
Okay, great. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, and being that we're at the top of the hour, it's probably a good spot to just let everyone go. So, Brian, thank you for your time today. It's been very informative, and thank you to everyone who dialed in. We appreciate you joining.
Yeah, feel free to follow up with emails to me as well. Matt's got your stuff. Let anybody know that they have questions. They're more than happy to email. Oh, there's one last. There's one question. I think I just saw it, Jeff, Matt. You want me to take it to comment on the safe harbor stuff?
Sure. Yes, please.
Matt? Yeah. So if Jeffrey, if you're still on the call, Jeffrey Mager had asked me to comment on the changes in safe harbor and what this means for data transfer. I don't think I have an answer for that yet, Jeffrey. The EU is in the process of signing a new document. I think it's going to, and I just came back from the ISSA International Conference. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, Jeffrey Harris from the UK, and asking this question, you know, how's this impacting the UK? He's part of the ISSA International group for the EU as well. And he said, I don't know, Brian. He said, I think it's going to take several months for this to shake out. So I think anyone who says that they have an answer to what's going to happen and how it's going to impact us doesn't really know the situation yet. I just don't think, I think it's too early to tell. I would watch the blogs and the online articles to see what's going on. There was some stuff just out this morning on it, so Google it and see what's going on. But I think it's going to be, I would guess, probably closer to Christmas before we really know what's shaking out with that. And then, in addition, if you hadn't seen, the CISA, the cybersecurity bill is up for a vote in the Senate today as well here in the U.S., and that could have an impact on any new regulations that the EU signs, because part of the problem with the CISA bill is it opens up our data to more visibility by security agencies, and that could have a definite negative impact on what happens with the EU. So it's a crapshoot right now. There's still way too many factors flying around for me to be able to pretend like I know what's going to happen yet. So, okay. Oh, yes, and Jeffrey had another comment that the big difference is that the Europeans view privacy as a human right versus Americans view it in the confines of consumer protection. That's absolutely true. And in addition to that, Jeffrey, yes, you'll get a copy of the presentation PowerPoint. In addition to that, not only do the Europeans view privacy as a human right, because of that, privacy is something that you must actively release to a vendor like Google or somebody else, versus in the United States, or you know, the term we use typically is opt-in. In the U.S., it's just the opposite, in that we make the assumption that because you signed that little EULA, that we can now bombard you with stuff and use your information any way we want, unless you opt out. That's a big difference too in terms of how it winds up from a practical perspective. So you're moving your data, yeah. I don't know who your, I'm not sure who your company is, Jeffrey. I don't have the list in front of me, but I see your note there that you're moving your data to the EU versus the U.S. Because then you're insulated from the fallout. That's actually probably a very good strategy. Again, I'm not sure what particular industry you're in, but yeah, you're probably safer that way. That's true. And in addition to that, not only do you have the international mining. Okay. Yeah, it's a mess. it's really a mess, and I don't want to get off onto my own political views about it. That's not the purpose of this presentation, but I think you bring up some very interesting and very valid points. So, good luck with that. Okay, I think that should wrap it up, Matt. I don't see any other questions coming through. So, okay, you're welcome, Jeffrey.
Okay, great.
Thank
well,
you, everyone.
Again,
I appreciate
everyone for joining.
Enjoy the rest of the day. And
yeah, you too, Brian. All right, thanks.
Go ahead.
Bye now. Have a great day.